It started with hoof prints across my driveway and a broken latch on my horse stable. I'm Carter Benson. I live on the edge of a semi-rural neighborhood where the HOA thinks it owns the air we breathe. I've got a couple of acres, a small barn, and 2 horses, real gentle ones, kept well within code. But that never stopped Jolene Tacker, the HOA president with a haircut sharp enough to slice bricks and a personality to match. She's the type who files noise complaints when birds chirp too loud. 2 weeks ago, Jolene showed up at my door, arms crossed, clipboard in hand, and that fake polite tone she uses when she's about to threaten someone over violating community standards. "Carter," she said, eyeing the barn like it personally offended her, "we've received multiple concerns about the presence of livestock. This is a residential area. Horses don't belong here." I gestured toward the very obvious zoning sign at the edge of my property. "This lot predates your HOA bylaws, Jolene. The county says I'm good." She pursed her lips like she'd sucked a lemon. "We'll see about that." I thought that was the end of it. I should have known better. This morning, I walked out to check on the horses just like I do every morning and found the stable door wide open, the lock snapped clean off. My gelding, Buckshot, was agitated, pacing in his stall. My mare, Cinnamon, was missing her bucket of oats. And on the barn floor, half buried in the straw, was a red folder stamped HOA enforcement records. And here's the kicker: Jolene's name was all over the documents inside. I bolted out of the barn and scanned the area. That's when I saw her. Jolene. In her shiny silver SUV, parked right next to my back fence, trying to look casual while brushing hay off her blazer. There was an empty feed bucket in her front seat. I stormed over. "What the hell, Jolene? You broke into my barn." She jumped. "Excuse me. Lower your tone, Carter. I was investigating an unauthorized structure. By trespassing onto my property and feeding my horses." She huffed, stepping back like she was the victim. "I was conducting an inspection. This is HOA business. You've had multiple violations." "No, I haven't." "You're fabricating them." And that's when I noticed her SUV was parked just inside the gate, barely clear of the entryway. She must have slipped in while I was feeding the dogs. I smiled. "Stay right there." I walked back to the barn, grabbed the tractor, and started hauling hay bales. Big ones. The kind you don't walk through, you climb over. One by one, I stacked them in front of her SUV, then behind it, then on either side. 4 walls of hay. Jolene's face went from smug to pale in under a minute as she realized she was boxed in. "Carter, this is illegal. You can't trap me. You trespassed. You broke a lock. And you tampered with livestock. I'm just making sure you don't flee the scene before the sheriff gets here." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the HOA board." "Good. I already called the cops." Her jaw dropped. And then, from the house, Buckshot let out a long, echoing whinny like even he knew the HOA queen was about to get dethroned. Deputy Langley pulled up with the kind of tired sigh a man makes when he's already guessing he's about to walk in nonsense. He parked next to the mailbox, left the cruiser running, and adjusted his utility belt before stepping out. His boots sank slightly into the gravel as he walked toward the hay barricade. Jolene was still inside her SUV, arms folded across her chest like she was the one being wronged. I stood near the barn, arms relaxed, but alert. Buckshot and Cinnamon were watching from their stalls like they were waiting for the popcorn to be passed out. Langley scanned the hay walls, then looked toward me. "You're the one who called it in?" I nodded. "Caught her inside my barn. Lock was broken. Feed bucket was tampered with." Jolene threw open her door and stepped down carefully, heels clicking against the ground. "This is absurd. I was performing a compliance audit. He's being deliberately obstructive, and now he's trying to imprison me with produce." Langley didn't flinch. "Ma'am, you accessed private property without permission?" "I most certainly did not. I was investigating a code violation. That barn isn't even on the original architectural plans." Langley turned to me. "You got paperwork for the structure?" "Yep. Built in '92. Permits are certified and grandfathered. County zoning approved it. Want me to grab the binder?" "Please." I headed inside, retrieved the file from the metal drawer I kept for just this kind of occasion, and brought out the full stack: permits, dated photos, notarized inspections. Langley flipped through it slowly, taking mental notes. Meanwhile, Jolene had pulled out her phone and was snapping pictures of the hay bales. "This is obstruction of a board member in the course of her duties. You'll be hearing from our legal representative." Langley looked up. "Ma'am, Unless you've got police credentials or a court order, entering someone's barn without consent is trespassing. And if the lock was broken, that's tampering. Doesn't matter if you're running for governor. She lowered her phone slightly. I didn't break anything. The lock was already loose. I raised an eyebrow. Then how come it was working just fine last night, and this morning it snapped in two and laying in the straw? Langley motioned for both of us to step aside. He walked to the barn entrance, crouched down, and studied the remains of the latch. He picked up the broken shank and examined the edges. This wasn't cut with bolt cutters, he murmured. Looks like it was twisted until it snapped. That takes force. He turned to Jolene. You sure you didn't try to force it open? She hesitated. I may have applied pressure. It appeared to be jammed. Langley stood. That's not how this works. You don't get to force entry because a door's not opening fast enough. That's a criminal offense. Jolene's face tightened. I was fulfilling my duties as president of the board. He's harboring livestock that violates aesthetic uniformity. Langley stared at her like she'd just told him the moon was out of compliance. Aesthetic what? She straightened. Our covenants are very clear. Livestock must not be visible from the street. His horses, my pasture is shielded by a 6-foot privacy fence, I interrupted. And again, I'm not bound by your covenants. You know that. Langley held up a hand. Don't care about HOA politics. What I care about is this file. He pointed to the documents in his hand. And this broken lock. I'm going to need you both to come down and give statements. Jolene scoffed. You can't be serious. I can, and I am. Property crime's still crime, no matter how many newsletters you sign your name to. She looked like she was about to protest, but Langley was already on his radio, calling in a unit to photograph the scene. 2 more deputies arrived within minutes. One began snapping pictures of the barn door and hoof prints, while the other took photos of Jolene's SUV surrounded by the hay bales. Langley handed me a form. You'll want to make an itemized list of anything tampered with. Feed buckets, tools, anything out of place. We'll process this as criminal trespass and potential property damage. Jolene's jaw was clenched so tight I half expected enamel to fly. And you, Langley said, turning to her, we're going to need to take a formal statement at the station. You can follow us in your vehicle. She glanced at the hay barricade. I'm not driving through that. Langley looked at me. Can you clear a lane so she can exit? Sure, I said. As soon as she signs a statement acknowledging she entered the barn without consent. Langley gave me a look that said, not helping, but I could see the corner of his mouth twitch. One of the deputies took down her preliminary statement, and once confirmed, I pulled 3 bales aside to make a narrow path for her SUV. She climbed in like she was entering a courtroom instead of a car and followed Langley's cruiser out of the driveway. The minute they were gone, I headed back to the barn and started inspecting everything. The feed bin had been opened, and Cinnamon's oats had been mixed with something that looked off. I scooped a handful into a baggie. The smell wasn't right, too strong, too bitter. I called Langley again. He came back with a county investigator 2 hours later. They collected the sample for testing. When I asked if they thought it was sabotage, Langley didn't answer directly. Just said, we'll know more once the lab runs it. Might be nothing. Might be something. That night, I set up 3 new trail cameras, one facing the barn entrance, one pointed at the pasture, and one hidden in the tree line near the back fence where Jolene had tried to sneak in. I wasn't taking any more chances. The next morning, I had an email from the county office. Turns out, Jolene had filed a petition to have the zoning of my parcel reviewed for inconsistencies with neighborhood character. She'd submitted it 3 days before she broke into the barn. She was trying to build a case, fabricate violations, lay groundwork for a forced removal. But she'd made a mistake several, actually, and now every one of them was documented. I sent a copy of the email to Langley and my lawyer, then printed it out and pinned it to the barn door right above the broken lock. The horses were calm that morning. No pacing, no agitation. Buckshot even leaned his head over the stall and nudged my shoulder. Don't worry, buddy, I told him. We're gonna finish this right. The county lab results came back 3 days later. Langley dropped the report off himself, which told me everything before I even looked at the envelope. Tested positive for Benson, he said, adjusting his hat as he leaned against the porch rail. It's a cattle feed additive. Safe in small doses for cows, but lethal for horses. I didn't respond right away. My jaw tightened, and my hands curled around the envelope like it might tear in half on its own. Buckshot and Cinnamon had been fine, thank God, but if they'd eaten more than a handful, that would have been it. She tried to poison them, I said, voice low. Langley nodded once. That's what it looks like. We've passed it on to the county prosecutor. This one's well beyond trespassing now. I watched the horizon for a long second, the stable in clear view. Did she admit anything? She lawyered up the second I read the tox report. Her attorney's already trying to spin it as a tragic misunderstanding. Said she thought the supplement was a vitamin treatment. I scoffed. And she just happened to dump it into my mare's oats? Langley didn't answer that. He just handed me a copy of the report and stepped down off the porch. We'll be in touch when the arraignment date's set. After he left, I sat on the porch steps, sunlight cutting sharp across the gravel drive. Cinnamon was grazing quietly in the paddock. She had no idea she'd been one mouthful away from death. I pulled out my phone, opened the community Facebook group I usually avoided like the plague, and started typing. I didn't bother with dramatics. Just facts. A known board member had entered my barn without consent, broken a lock, and tampered with feed now confirmed to be laced with a toxic substance. I attached the photo of the test results, blacked out the sensitive details, and posted it. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few concerned comments. Maybe a handful of neighbors acknowledging the situation. But I underestimated how fast a small-town fire spreads. Within 2 hours, the post had over 80 responses. By the time I came in for dinner, it was pushing 200. Half the neighborhood seemed to be in shock. The other half had stories. She fined us for putting up a little free library, one neighbor wrote. Said it was unauthorized architecture. She threatened to tow my husband's car because the tires weren't aligned with the curb exactly. She made my daughter cry because our Halloween decorations were excessively ghoulish. That night, I heard from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, Lena Hollis, whose backyard butted up to mine on the east side. She used to be on the HOA board until she resigned last spring, claiming irreconcilable differences. She showed up the next morning with a manila folder and a tight expression. I kept copies, she said, handing me the folder. Every board meeting, every vote, every time Jolene pushed something through without quorum. I wasn't sure what she was trying to build, but now I think I know. Inside were typed agendas, minutes never filed with the county, and handwritten notes in the margins, push rezone, contact zoning rep, buy out back lots. She'd been using the HOA to angle for a development project. My barn and pasture were in the way. She wanted to consolidate the outer lots into a greenbelt and market it as equestrian-free luxury housing, Lena said. Your place was the last holdout. I stared at the papers, a slow realization settling like frost on the back of my neck. She hadn't just wanted my horses gone. She wanted the land cleared. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Lena looked away. I didn't have proof of anything criminal until now, and I was scared. Her lawyer's aggressive. But with this feed incident, I couldn't stay quiet. I locked the documents in my office safe and called my attorney, who immediately requested a copy for a civil suit. The criminal case was already in motion, but this opened a new front. That weekend, the community held an emergency meeting without HOA approval. Over 50 people showed up, folding chairs set in rows across my pasture, kids playing tag between them, dogs barking in the distance. It felt less like a meeting and more like an uprising. I stood in front of them and laid everything out, what had happened, what had been found, and what Lena had brought forward. People were furious. Not performatively. Not the kind of outrage that dies by Monday. Real, sustained, organizing anger. We're done with her, said Mr. Randall, who lived here since the 80s. It's time we take our neighborhood back. We can file for immediate board suspension, added a woman in a denim jacket. I've seen it done before. Emergency vote, then petition for board dissolution. I looked at Lena. You think we have the numbers? She nodded. Easily. And the momentum. The next week was a blur. Flyers printed. Door-to-door conversations. Signatures gathered. By Friday, we had over 70% of the homeowners signed onto the petition. The HOA charter required only 55 to force a vote. We delivered the documents to the county registrar and scheduled the emergency election. Jolene's lawyer tried to stall it, citing procedural errors, but the registrar shot it down. Everything had been filed correctly. She couldn't hide behind her title anymore. The day of the vote, she didn't even show up. Lena and a temporary board oversaw the proceedings. It wasn't close. 83% voted to revoke Jolene's presidency and initiate a complete audit of all HOA finances and decisions from the past 2 years. 3 days later, the county prosecutor filed felony charges: trespassing, destruction of private property, and attempted animal cruelty. The Benson samples were irrefutable. No more spin. No more hiding behind bylaws. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutor declined. I hadn't expected to feel relief, not right away. But that evening, I walked out to the barn and leaned against the stall as Cinnamon nuzzled my arm. Buckshot flicked his ears, calm and content. The air felt cleaner, quieter. This place was never meant to be a battlefield. But when someone brings war to your doorstep, you don't just back down. You build your barricade. Hay bales, evidence, community support, and you hold the line. And sometimes, you win. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Just 2 rows of benches, wood paneling faded from years of sunlight, and a lone ceiling fan clicking slowly above the judge's bench. Still, the air was heavy with tension. It wasn't every day a homeowners association president faced felony charges for tampering with livestock feed. Jolene sat at the defense table, her posture stiff, lips pressed into a line that hadn't relaxed since she walked in. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. She kept her eyes forward, locked somewhere above the judge's head, like she couldn't bear to look at anyone else in the room. The prosecutor, Maya Reeves, stood confidently, a stack of exhibits in her hand. She wasn't flashy, just thorough. I'd spoken with her twice in preparation for this hearing, and both times she'd asked sharp questions, the kind that made it clear she wasn't just doing a job, she wanted a conviction. When the judge entered, we all rose. He was older, with a voice like gravel and no patience for theatrics. "This is a preliminary hearing for the matter of the state versus Jolene Tacker," he said. 3 charges: criminal trespass, destruction of private property, and attempted animal cruelty. State, you may proceed. Maya stepped forward. Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate that the defendant unlawfully entered Mr. Carter Benson's private barn without consent, tampered with a locked structure, and introduced a toxic substance into an animal's food supply, an act that, if not discovered in time, could have resulted in the death of 2 horses. She presented the photos of the latch, then the lab results, then the feed sample in its sealed bag, tagged and logged. There was no speculation. Every point was backed by a timestamp, a signature, or a chain of custody document. Jolene's lawyer tried to object when Maya called Deputy Langley to the stand, but the judge waved it off. Let's hear him. Langley took the oath, sat down, and laid out the sequence of events. He didn't embellish, just the facts, how he'd been called to the property, what he saw, what Jolene admitted at the scene, and the results of the toxicology report once it came back from the lab. She said the lock was stuck, he added, but it was clearly snapped from torque. She also admitted to handling the feed, though she claimed she thought it was a supplement. That doesn't explain why the container she brought was unlabeled. Did she have permission to be on the property? Maya asked. No. Did she possess any legal authority to conduct inspections of private agricultural structures? No. Jolene's lawyer tried to redirect, asking whether it was possible someone else had introduced the substance into the feed. Langley didn't flinch. No one else had access to the barn that morning. Owner had trail cam footage of her walking in, and none of anyone else. Fence was locked. No other footprints but hers, his, and the horses. When it was my turn to testify, I kept it simple. I described what I saw, what I found, and how the horses reacted. I handed over the vet's report showing Cinnamon had elevated vitals for 24 hours after ingesting the oats. Did the defendant ever attempt to reach out to you before entering the barn? Maya asked. No. She confronted me a few days earlier, claiming I was violating HOA standards. I told her the property was exempt. That was the end of the conversation until she broke in. Did you give her any indication she was welcome to inspect the property? Absolutely not. The judge didn't ask questions. He just nodded once, then looked back and forth between the attorneys. I've heard enough. All 3 charges will proceed to trial. Bail remains set. Next hearing is scheduled for 30 days from today. Jolene's lawyer looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. She didn't even blink. Outside, Maya caught up with me in the parking lot. You held up well in there, she said. Most people don't stay that calm on the stand. I've been dealing with her for months, I said. This was the first time I didn't have to explain myself to someone who thought the HOA was the law. She chuckled. Well, this time, the law's on your side. We'll keep you posted on the trial schedule. As she walked away, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It wasn't over, but it was moving in the right direction. Back home, the neighborhood had shifted. The emergency board had been replaced with a rotating committee system. 5 homeowners, elected quarterly, no president, no single point of control. Lena had helped draft the new charter alongside a retired municipal attorney who lived near the creek. It passed unanimously. The new structure gave residents breathing room. No more surprise inspections. No more arbitrary fines. People started reclaiming their homes, not just their property, but their peace. The stable had new locks now. Reinforced steel, keyed entry only. I'd installed a motion-triggered spotlight above the barn doors, plus a second camera that backed up to the cloud every 12 hours. I wasn't taking any chances, not again. One evening, as I was brushing buckshot down, a knock echoed from the front porch. I stepped out, wiping my hands on a rag, and saw a man I didn't recognize, tall, mid-50s, crisp shirt, leather folder under his arm. "Mr. Benson?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm Troy Mendez. Real Estate Fraud Division. County Attorney's Office." I nodded slowly. "Didn't expect a visit. We've been reviewing HOA petition records and property zoning applications from the past year. Your case opened a few doors. Thought you'd want to know Jolene Tacker submitted rezoning requests under a shell LLC. Claimed to represent a development firm that doesn't exist." My blood chilled. She was trying to sell the land? Not just sell it. She had a fake buyer lined up. If that rezone had gone through, she'd have tried to force an easement through your pasture. You were the last piece that didn't fit. I leaned against the rail. How far did she get? Not far enough. But we're adding wire fraud and document forgery to the charges. Her trial's going to get a lot more complicated. He handed me a card. "If anyone else approaches you about your land, give me a call. We're keeping a close eye on everything connected to that file." After he left, I sat outside for a long time. The sun dipped low behind the trees, casting golden light across the pasture. Cinnamon trotted near the fence, tail swishing, ears flicking toward the sound of birds in the distance. She was alive. They both were. And the woman who tried to erase that fact from the world was finally facing consequences deeper than any fine or community board vote. She'd crossed every line, and now the system was closing in. 3 months later, the trial began. It lasted 4 days. The prosecution laid everything out: the break-in, the feed tampering, the fraudulent company, the attempts to manipulate zoning records. Multiple county employees testified. Lena testified. Even the notary who'd refused to certify Jolene's forged LLC paperwork got up there and told the truth. Jolene never took the stand. Her lawyer advised against it. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was immediate. 2 years suspended for the trespass and property damage, but 4 years active time for attempted animal cruelty and fraud. No parole for 24 months. When the bailiff led her out of the courtroom, she didn't say a word. Just kept walking, eyes on the floor. Back in the neighborhood, people started planting again. Flowers along the sidewalks. A new tree near the clubhouse. Someone painted a mural on the community garden wall, a horse galloping across a wide field, tail high, mane wild. Lena dropped off a copy of the new bylaws. "We put in a clause," she said. "No board member can serve more than 1 term. And any complaints have to be submitted with evidence, not just suspicion." I nodded, flipping through the pages. "That's a good start." She glanced toward the barn. "They're lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have them." That night, I walked to the fence and leaned against it, watching the stars come out. Buckshot nickered softly behind me. The pasture was quiet. No headlights. No clipboards. No threats dressed up as neighborhood concern. Just peace. And hay bales, stacked neatly along the barn wall, this time as feed, not fortification.